Okay, well, thanks for having us here today, Paul. It's an honor anytime we can work together. The work that our families have done, like you mentioned, has been very beneficial for both of us, and specific on the drainage side, but also on the seed side. As we've gotten into more specialty markets, Paul's done a really good job of going out and finding the best genetics available for us. So I'm going to go through some things really quickly because we've got a small group here, and I think it's always funner to let you guys guide the discussion rather than me sit up here and lecture. So I'm going to paint kind of a big picture as fast as I can and leave it to you guys to decide which part of that you think is interesting and want to know more about. I guess you have to go back to 1983. My dad made the decision to quit doing conventional tillage and started into ridge tillage. At the time, that was very unusual. People thought he'd lost his mind, and there were a lot of challenges with it, but he saw a lot of soil leaving the farm, and that wasn't acceptable to him as a steward, so he was in search of a better way. When I came back to the farm in 91, we went to a meeting in Illinois, Jim Kinsella's, and looked at his no-till system. And by the time we got from Bloomington back to Attica, I had Dad talked into getting rid of the cultivators and the ridgers and going straight no-till. Probably somewhere in the late 90s, we got approached by a professor from Purdue who needed a place to do cover crop research, specifically with annual ryegrass. We weren't really interested in cover crops at the time. My dad had played with them a little bit in the 80s, and he got burnt pretty good. So that wasn't even on our radar, but she was a good friend, and we had a field that was out of the way, nobody could see, and we planted when she said plant and sprayed when she said spray and harvested and so forth, and we were just going through the motions. One spring, I was out doing one of my least favorite jobs on the farm back then, which was fixing tile holes. And we had ryegrass sown in this field. It was second week in April. It was maybe 6 to 8 inches tall. At that time, we were transitioning a lot of acres from conventional tillage and ridge till to no-till, and they said, well, one of the keys to success is you've got to get rid of your compacted layers. And for us, we thought that meant we needed to get down 12, 13, 14 inches with an unfervor zone builder to break that up. And we were pulling the guts out of our tractors, and it was very time consuming. But anyway, I'm standing in the bottom of this 4-foot hole, and I noticed that this little 6-inch tall plant has roots down over 4 feet deep. I got to looking at the channels they'd created and everything, and it just hit me. That was an aha moment that, hey, these plants can do more to open our soil up than any piece of steel probably ever could. So that launched us, but yet we're still thinking about things very in the physical sense. We're not talking about biology yet. We're not talking about carbon yet, just compaction, really. I guess to back up, one other thing that I think is helpful for you to understand and what's influenced our thought process through the years is that, first of all, in microeconomics, they teach you that a commodity business, which most of what we're doing here is considered a commodity business. The average producer breaks even over the long haul, which means that if you want to earn true profits over the long term, you have to figure out some way to be above average. And everybody in this room has different skill set and different ways we might go about achieving that. But for me, I looked at it, and I'd spent time as a commodity broker, so I thought maybe risk management was an area that I could hone in on. And then because the experience with ridge till and no-till and seeing what was happening in our soils, soil health became another thing that we thought we could turn into a long-term competitive advantage. So we did that. Also, my first job out of school, first day, my boss hands me a book called Competitive Strategy by Michael Porter. And as far as I know, it's still kind of the Bible on this topic, but I was to read that from cover to cover and then chat with him about that. And I'm not going to go through the whole book. That's a long discussion. But a couple things out of that. One, it's hard to make money when you're doing something that everybody else wants to do or can do. So the more barriers, the more you can find things that other people can't or won't do, the better opportunity there is to earn a profit. And two is to try and build barriers or competitive advantages that last long term. And back to soil health, and you know, I'm not going to talk about regenerative ag and all the feel good, we're going to improve the environment, we're going to do all these things. Those are real things, and I don't want to minimize them, but today we're just going to talk about economics, because that's what ultimately drives us, and that's what pays the bills. And without that, we can't sustain the other. I would also add that any definition of a regenerative system requires people. And sitting on the stage here with me is the next generation. So if we don't have a system that makes the next generation want to stay involved, get involved, it's not very regenerative either. But so back to economics of regenerative ag in our experience. First off, like I said, we saw that we could change things in the soil using plants. I think even before that, when we went to no-till, it meant that my dad and I, two of us, could farm 1,800 acres with 240 horsepower tractors. We could be very efficient. So that's kind of where the thinking started. And then as you learn more, we got into cover crops, and we saw that we could break up compaction. And then we started to learn about soil biology and how that if we want to develop systems that don't require a lot of external input, we need that biology to function in the soil like it did before we came and kind of messed it all up. So every iteration we go reflected the knowledge that we were gaining about the soil and how it worked. And I'm embarrassed, I think at 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, the way I picture in my mind how things worked there was so wrong. And I'm sure that hopefully 20 years from now, we'll look back at how we think about things today and realize that, man, that was dumb, or we didn't know anything yet. I mean, what we don't know dwarfs what we do. But so as a young farmer, the first farm I ever rented was from a cousin, that my dad's cousin was retiring. And he was a great example to me, because this guy bought 400 acres on contract, raised 6 kids, sent them all to college, paid for the farm, and when he was ready to retire, he built a nice new home in town for him and his wife and moved to town and rented the farm to us. And that was a real powerful example to me of the power of land ownership versus trying to farm the world. And so from very early on, my focus was always, if a cash rent is here and a land payment's here, how do we gain enough advantage over the average to make that payment? And most of our growth has been through ownership rather than trying to rent more ground. Today, we farm 4,500 acres, and we own 60% of that. That also changes our time horizons on how we think. And we're able to think much longer term because we know we're going to control that ground. Even the ground that we lease, the shortest lease we have is 7 years, and some of them go out to 15. Because we know that the things we're doing today don't necessarily pay off today or tomorrow. It takes years to build that. Okay, so that's always been a fundamental part of the mindset on everything we did in the business, but particularly with regards to soil health. So as we built that up, we started to see some differences. And the first farm that my wife and I bought after I came back to the farm was in 1991. And when we bought that farm, it was average of 1.8% organic matter. Today, it's something over 4%. It took way too long to get there. With what we know and what we're doing today, we think we can cut that time in half. But you say, why is that important? Well, what is the number one determinant of our profitability and bottom line every year in terms of things we can't control? Water. That's exactly right. So we want to have a system that allows us to maximize what water we do receive. So that starts with, can we soak it in? It does us no good if the water hits and runs off. So we need to have good soil aggregation and soil health in order to get that to absorb. One of the cheapest ways you can use on your own farm to go out and decide how your soil health is doing is to do water infiltration tests for $5 worth of stuff in a little bit of time, you can go out and learn a lot about the state of your soils. And that's one of the, we talk about all this high-tech stuff. That's very low-tech, but at the end of the day, good healthy soil can take a lot of water, a lot more than poor health soil. So we want to soak it in, and then two, this is the big one related to carbon, is that for every 1% of organic matter that's out there, and I'm just talking 12 inches of soil, hopefully we're going much deeper than that, but just in 12 inches, you can hold about an acre-inch of water. So on that farm that we bought in 1991, it can hold 2 inches more water now than it could when we got it. And you say, well, that's maybe not enough, maybe no big deal, but how many years, would we get a rain, maybe the first week in July, and then we go a month? And so that period, how much we can store directly relates to how we can maintain yield across the farm. In 2016 or 15, I think was the best corn year we've ever had in Fountain County. And even in that year, we went 3 weeks dry in July. And we had farms that we were seeing over 300 bushels in the low ground, but it was struggling to maintain 200 in the high ground. That's all about organic matter, okay? 100 bushel differential in the best year ever based on that incremental organic matter and ability to store water so the plant doesn't run out and start shortening that ear. That's a lot of money some years. So that's very real, and that's why we don't really, I've paid very little attention to all these carbon programs. To me, didn't even begin to understand the value of carbon. That carbon's worth way more to me than it is to anybody else. And that's one of the reasons why. Another big one is nitrogen. Again, for every % of organic matter, we're going to mineralize on average about 30 units of N. So adding that 2% organic matter back means that that's 60 units of N that we don't have to buy every year. That's like an annuity that just keeps on paying. This is the way we're monetizing soil health, is looking at all these little things that add up over time as we build up our soils, and why we're willing to make investments that may not pay off in year 1, but we know by year 5 or 10, it's going to be significant. So that takes us through no-till and cover crops. And in 2016, we one of 12 farms in the state of Indiana, we, through CCSI, and I can't tell you what that acronym is even anymore, but basically we did on-farm research, and on our farm, we're looking at cover crops versus no cover crops. So our standard practice was cover crops, so we left blocks, random blocks without cover crops, and then NRCS and Purdue and everybody else came in and did every kind of soil test, biomass test, Solvita, Haney, Cornell, soil health, everything they could throw at it, and they collected the data. And they also went to the neighbor who had the same soil type that had been conventional tillage for a long time. And the results were, some of them were really good. We saw the increased organic matter. We already knew that was there, but that verified it. Our soil aggregation was excellent. And that goes back to that water infiltration, be able to store the water and get it in the ground. But where I felt like we really lacked, where we hadn't shown improvement, this on a farm that hadn't been tilled in 35 years, that hadn't had any synthetic P or K in probably 15 years, had cover crops. I really thought our biology should have been a lot better, and it just wasn't. And we started to really think about why is that? Because we know that that's the key to fertility and feeding the plant without us having to do it for it. And, it's hard to say exactly what, but, if it ends in IDE, it's probably not good for soil biology. So that was one factor that led us to go down the organic road, was understanding that to continue this soil health journey and go to the next level, we need to figure out how not to use this stuff anymore. The second factor was these three guys sitting here were all saying they were kind of interested in farming, and we have a rule that if you want to farm, that's great, but you need to go to school and you need to work somewhere else first. But that put me on notice that I've got to figure out how to take this farm and make it work for a lot more families someday. And if we stayed the course in what we were doing, I was afraid that would mean that, for us to make that happen, we're going to have to pick up a lot, probably double the size of our operation, go from 5,000 to 10,000 acres. And just looking around this room, I have people here that I've grown up with and been friends with all my life that that means that I'm in competition with them and or trying to take something from them. And we've never wanted to play that game that way, and I didn't want my sons to come in and feel like that was their path to survival. So we really started to focus on, instead of being extensive, being more intensive. How do we make more money per acre? And we talked earlier about trying to be profitable enough to make the land payment, but now we want to go accelerate that, and we want to use this soil health investment, okay, to monetize what we built up through the years. And organics right now is the way we're going to do that in a bit. Damon's going to talk about what we see the future is, but that allowed us to get into a market where, we're usually selling grain typically 2 to 2.5 times what conventional crops are. It's been a tough road. It's taken a lot of learning because you're looking at a guy that grew up without tillage, and so having to learn some of these new tricks to make this work has been challenging, but we're starting to get there. Going forward, we see so much opportunity here. Half the organic grain consumed in this country is imported. Organics is the fastest growing segment of the food system. So it's growing 12 to 15% a year. So there's a lot of room for growth. The other thing we really like about this is it gives us more time. When you're a conventional corn and soybean farmer, one of the best things we can do, most powerful things we can do for the land is take a year off, not extract something for a year or two, or maybe graze it or put it in perennials. These are the ways we can build soil the fastest. We could never afford to do that conventionally, but if we can raise a good corn or a good bean crop, now we can take a year and maybe not have to worry about how much cash can we extract from this and just focus on building the soil again. There's just all kinds of good things that start to happen, and it just kind of snowballs once you get the soil working. The yields come up. That allows you to rest it. That allows you to build it more. So we're very excited about where we're going. It hasn't been easy, but because of these three guys standing up here with me today, it's the most worthwhile thing I've ever done. And I'm going to let them share a little bit about what they see in regards to their particular area, or how soil health has influenced them to get back involved in the farm. And so one of the things we have a grass-fed beef business, and unlike what Ken told you out there, it is probably the cheapest 100% grass-fed beef you can buy right now, okay? All beef is expensive. Fat cattle, commercial fat cattle are $1.70 a pound now. That's stupid high. So I understand why people think our beef's priced high, but relatively, we're trying to keep it affordable. But I look at it as a tool. We know we can accelerate biological activity and regenerating soil by quite a little bit under hoof as compared to crops. And Dylan's the one that's responsible for and in charge of that part of things. So what do you think, Dylan?
I guess I'll tell you a little bit about our operation. So
we got 2 minutes, by the way. I think we're getting the time signal back here.
I like that. So we run cattle. Like you said, we like giving some of our acres some rest years, and it also helped us get into the organic space. Those 2 years that you have to wait to be able to, get your organic certification, we were able to graze some there. So, using warm season annuals after a wheat crop, that's one thing we like doing. We can either graze it, in the summer into the fall, or we really like to stockpile it and graze our cattle through the winter on that. That really opens up the opportunity of the species you can use. A lot of the warm season stuff, we've used blends of 20 different species of cover crops, and it's cool to watch cattle graze all that stuff and still be able to get a little bit of profit off of that, make a little bit of money. Even though we're kind of resting those acres, we're still drawing a little bit of income off of that.
How would you say that our involvement in the regenerative arena has affected your decision to want to come back to the farm?
I think it positively influenced it. I enjoy thinking outside the box a little bit. I wanted to get in the cattle, and in the conventional system, that's really not, possible. So it gave me an opportunity to come back and have a spot on the farm.
Damon, talk a little bit about the future and how we can use soil health to go beyond organic and add value to what we're raising.
Yeah, so Dad kind of talked about how we want to limit our need for inputs in raising a crop, and how there's oligopes on the input side, there's oligopes in the marketing side of selling your grains, and so we've kind of started it with the grass-fed beef business, but trying to get away from that on the input side. But then on selling our products, Hoosier Grass-Fed Beef has kind of been our pilot program of getting closer to the consumer and maximizing the amount of margin that we can capture ourselves. And so, in the organic space, but also, being able to farm regeneratively, we're looking at trying to raise crops that we can provide to a consumer or do a little bit of processing to maximize the amount of margin that we're able to get. And that should allow us to raise, once Dad's moved on from the farm, raise our 3 families, hopefully allow our kids to come back. And, our goal is to farm less acres as we go on through life. And so being able to maximize the amount of margin. And the other part of that is that technology is coming down the pipe to allow us to easily, measure the nutrient density of the crops that we raise. So, for example, we sell most of our corn to a dairy up in northern Indiana, and what's the value of being able for them to scan a load of our corn and know the protein and sugar levels in that corn and pay us a premium if it's higher than our competitor.
What Damon's talking about is there's all kinds of science that shows that the more biologically active the soil is, the more nutrient dense the products coming off of it are. There's a measurable difference there, and it's going to affect the consumer. And the grocery store is going to have an app on their phone. They can scan the carrots and pick the most nutrient dense ones. It's going to apply to us. Damon hit on something that I have to take 2 minutes and talk about. Another facet that led into this is about the time this CCSI study got me thinking about the biology, and I knew these guys were wanting to farm. I looked at the Monsanto annual report. This is before they were bought by Bayer. And in 2017, if you take the net profit from agricultural operations for Monsanto and divide that by every acre of corn, soybeans, and cotton in this country, they made $30 an acre. Okay? They consistently make 15% return on equity every year. Okay? In the same year, the average farmer in Illinois lost $40 an acre. Something's wrong with that picture. And Damon mentioned the word oligopoly. It's kind of like a monopoly, only more than one company, obviously. So if you look at all the crop protection stuff, all the fertilizer, seed, again, you've got 2 or 3 companies in each of those sectors that control things. They get their 15% a year almost without fail. On the output side, ADM, Cargill, Bunge, all those companies, same thing. They get their 15% without fail. The farmer's left here in the middle, scratching out, feeling good if we can make 3 to 4%. And I just feel like that's a fundamentally flawed model. So a big part of what we're doing is about trying to build a system that the only input we need is some seed. And then on the output side, to be able to go right around those big companies, go straight to the consumer. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to make that same 15% a year ourselves. That's really a fundamental part of this as well.
Is that like the Oscar wrap up, the speech wrap up?
It looks pretty random, but the lights are motion sensors and they're on a timer. So they dim for like 5 minutes. That's why we're doing that.
So real quick, Dalton, talk to us about Dalton just came back. He's the youngest and just started full-time January 1st. And I think it's crucial with these teams, A, that they all get along, which we're really proud of the fact that they do, but B, they all have different interests and skill sets. And talk about what you're going to contribute here, hopefully.
So I went to school to be an ag diesel mechanic. So
after school, after I graduated from University in Northwestern Ohio, I went and got a job just down the road here at McAllister Machinery. And the combine we run on our farm is the Claas Lexion. So going to that dealership, I got to learn a lot about those combines. So I went there for an internship for 6 months. So I was in field service. So I got to see a lot of different machinery doing that. But after that, I went and got a job in the shop to get a little more hands-on and learn a little bit more about all the different machinery that they sell there. But they sent me out to Omaha, Nebraska this past July, I think, and I went through Claas's school for Lexion combines. And so basically now that I'm back on the farm, I'm just trying to fix all my brother's mistakes. Like a couple years ago, Damon decided in our last field to go ahead and run over a cattle water. So that's always corn
nice.
planter.
There'll always be opportunities to fix broken equipment. Thanks, Dalton. One other thing I want to mention, I've kind of glossed over a lot of stuff and focused on economics, but make no mistake that this system, the number one most important thing is keeping a living plant out there all the time. That's what energizes and drives and fertilizes. Everything that we're doing is based off that. And it truly is a plant-based system. And you know, one of our absolute objectives is that something's growing on every acre all the time year round. And I think that's valuable. It's essential for organic, but anyone can benefit by adopting that mentality with lower weed pressures that we've seen, with, you know, increasing the carbon in the soil, increasing the soil biology. I know, you know, there's a lot of stuff here, but fundamentally, if there's one thing you remember from this, it's keep something growing all the time, and your bottom line can be improved through that. I know it's lunchtime. I don't want to stand between anybody and lunch, but we'll be around for a little bit if you have more detailed questions. Thanks for your patience and participation today.
Dan, if I were seeing this and a light bulb went off, whatever it was, whether it was cattle or cover crops or, you know, the switch that you made to organic, and I'm farming today, what's one step that I could take that you would recommend that's like, obviously if I'm a conventional farmer today, I'm not going to go out and decide to be organic tomorrow, right? But what's one step that I could take that would be, hey, this is good bang for your buck right up front?
Growing sow rye ahead of soybeans is kind of as close to a no-brainer as it gets. It really does help put downward pressure on the weed, especially a lot of the troublesome broadleaf weeds. And the other thing, this is more big picture again, but you know, we get inundated by farm magazines and all the media and everything, and I encourage you to cultivate sources of information outside the typical, because and particularly for, you know, finding folks that are doing interesting things that are working really well, they don't have something to sell you, because most of the information we're getting is coming through people that have an ulterior motive a lot of times. So cultivate relationships and sources of information that lie outside that to the best of your ability. I know it's hard to do, but that's where a lot of the best nuggets I've come across come from. So keep something growing and expand your network. Do we have time for questions, Paul, or is it time to get on the lunch line?
Couple questions? Let's do 2 questions. Yes, sir.
Northern Indiana, Newton County, Indiana, and we're not getting a premium today, okay? But we were just at Louisville last week, and there's one company there that's already got a sensor you can put in your combine today that'll measure protein and fat, along with yield and moisture. So I'm saying the sensor, I think what he's getting at is there is a measurable difference in the output we're producing, just like in the beef. We can send that to a lab and measure and show you that our fatty acid profiles of omega-3s and all that are the same as wild-caught salmon. Oh, yeah.
The question is, I'm going to repeat the question so it's recorded, or so everybody can hear it. The question is the nutrient density, sorry, say it again. Oh, is it just protein and oil, or what specifically are they looking at for nutrient density?
That would be specific to the customer and what they're doing. Somebody that's feeding organic corn to chickens might have a different set of priorities than feeding them to dairy cows, but it applies almost universally, but percentage-wise it varies, and there's big differences in genetics, but if you take the same variety of corn and grow it on a field that's been chemically farmed versus a biologically active soil, you're going to see significant differences in nutrient density across the board, not just the things I mentioned, but all kinds of things. And then you can tweak that even more by looking at genetics and their predisposition for certain things that might cater to a particular user. I think that's true, but we also hope we can market, to the end user that we can take wheat and make flour. That's not that hard to do, and show you the nutrient differences in our flour versus what you can buy on a grocery store shelf. So it's wide ranging, and it's particular to each market, I would say.
One more question, anybody?
Everybody's hungry.
All right, well, Dan and the boys will be around for a little bit to answer any more questions. And as he said, we do these things for education. We do them so that we can hopefully build relationships with you guys. But like he was saying, the biggest advantage of getting farmers in rooms like this is so that you guys can have conversations with each other, fellowship, ask some off-the-wall questions that you maybe wouldn't ask in a group setting. And so we encourage you to do that over lunch. So we've got a nice meal prepared. We are going to have opportunity for the PARP conversation to take place right before lunch, and then we'll say grace and eat. So if everybody grabs your chair, if you want to sit for lunch, and head back west. And let's give the DeSutter family a big hand before you take off. Okay, yeah.